Good morning and Assalamu alaikum. You are tuned into Inspire FM 105.1 FM. It's Friday, 23rd of May, and the time has now just gone 10 o'clock. Welcome to Mother's Planet, a show where there is always something to talk about in a productive and beneficial way. I am your host, Neelum, and joining me in the show this morning is my guest, Amara and Saif. Assalamu alaikum, guys.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam, Neelum.
How are you both?
Alhamdulillah, all good, all good.
Yeah, really good today. Sun is shining.
Yes. And you're here in the studio with me. So, it's all good. It's been a bit of a crazy week with the weather. You've mentioned the sun. I've actually found it quite cold. So I don't know about how you all have found it. Now, listeners, we have a jam-packed morning for you all this morning where we are going to be talking about exams. Yes, across the nation we have GCSEs and A-levels being sat, and the pressure is kicking in now as most of the subjects are slowly being ticked off for the GCSE subjects. And fear not, because this morning my lovely guest will be sharing some hacks as to how to get those kids engaged and hopefully successful in their exams. Now, if you do have a pen and paper to hand, get it ready, because they are going to be sharing some exam techniques and things that you could try at home with your children. And if kids, you are tuned in this morning, listen out for some top tips. Now, listeners, we are live on air, reaching out to all our listeners through the airwaves at Inspire FM 105.1 FM. You can also hear the show on TuneIn via the Inspire FM webpage. And we're also streaming live on the Facebook page, where you must give the show a thumbs up and also can put down any comments or questions that you have on today's topic. I am, as always, taking in WhatsApp and text messages on the studio number 07779 481 822. So drop us a message if you have anything that you'd like to ask my guest this morning, or whether it's just to have a rant about the weather. Now, in today's show, Amara and Saif are going to be bringing on their years of experience in helping students succeed in their exams. And we'll be discussing top revision tips and how to avoid the dreaded burning out. And also we'll be looking at, because obviously the exams have started now, so what to do the day before the exam, the day of the exam, and after the exam. So these are all things that we need to try and get the kids engaged into. Now, before I carry on waffling, I'm going to get my guests to briefly introduce themselves. So guys, if I can ask you guys to introduce yourself, your roles, and any experience that you have in supporting students during the exam period.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Saif. I run an educational organization where we have supported over 1,500 students across the last 3 years. Currently, as per the GCSE students, we're supporting about 350 GCSE students across the country and within Luton. In terms of experience with dealing with young people, I'm also one of the co-chairmen at the Raise Up Foundation. So we deal with young people across various different backgrounds. And I myself have gone through the GCSE 9-1 system, where the changes happened, where the GCSE system changed from A star to C to 9-1, and then the new A-level system. Myself, I graduated from University College London last year as well. So I understand the struggles that the students have been going through. And we've been teaching a lot of students different various methods on how they can secure the highest form of grades during their GCSEs and in the A-levels. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to share all of that today.
Yes, thank you. And mashallah, lots of experience there, and fairly new graduate as well. So mashallah, doing all of that and graduating at the same time. So that's well done to you. That must have been a challenge. So, well done for achieving that. And Amara.
Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Amara Qureshi, and I am the head of school currently at Cedars Upper School. I started there in September. I'm in my 16th year of teaching. It's absolutely flown by. Started my journey at Denby High School, which is where I was a student myself. And I've taught in quite a few Luton schools. And I was a science teacher. Now I'm a head of school. I still love teaching my science. I was doing my revision tips for the pupils on Saturday, and before every exam at school. Still need to pass that on, but just love that just love that exam season anyway. But yeah, so this is my third time here, isn't it, with you, Neelum?
I
It's my
think
third
so.
show
Yeah,
now with
yeah,
you,
I know,
doing
yeah, I
exam
think so.
tips.
Yes, no, I think
So it's nice to be back.
Yes, it's lovely to have you on board as well. Now, Saif, I'm going to pitch this question at yourself. In terms of exam preparation and how things have evolved, have you seen a difference over the years in both the curriculum and technology?
Yes, definitely. So with exam preparation, when the GCSE 9-to-1 system first came about, what a lot of students would see is, there wasn't the presence of AI. So now you have online flashcards, for example, where before there was a big reliance on textbooks, notebooks. Now everything can be accessible online. We were discussing this earlier, that sometimes over information can lead to confusion. Although there are very good websites, online flashcards, online tools, AI, essay markers, exam markers, many different things that students can use online. In the exam preparation has evolved over time, where it's become a lot more technical. But I do believe that students need to find one method that does work for them, one major method that works for them, because you don't want to get confused in the midst of all the other information that's provided to you. So one major change that's apparent is shifting from textbooks and notebooks to the online tools.
Yes, absolutely. And, as you mentioned, AI definitely, and even for adults, it can be quite dangerous. You could be relying on something for work and ask AI to pitch something for you. And it's the over-reliance on that technology, and misinformation as well, because it's not always accurate.
Absolutely. And oftentimes students, I know a lot of students of mine personally using AI to mark their exams. And oftentimes, AI is unable to mark like an examiner would. So AI can give you a really high score, but that might not actually reflect your real result. So it is a very borderline, there's a risk factor in there as well. But I'm sure that it can be used for positive benefits, which a lot of students are using it for.
Yeah, I think it's still early days. I think everyone's toying with the AI industry at the moment. It's not quite, settling in as we expected it. And, as with any new technology that comes out. So, Imara, revising and studying, they're obviously not the same.
Nope.
There's a difference.
Yes, there is. So studying is obviously teaching yourself the content, and revision is revisiting content you already know, strengthening it, embedding it, reminding yourself, chunking it, and finding ways of being able to remember what you already know in a better way. But before an exam, you will be doing both, because there's so much content in the exams, and I know there's lots of national research going on, and government are looking into the pressure on young people at the minute. But there is a lot. So as much as students are revising, ideally what we would like is the moments before the exam that they are just revisiting all the knowledge that they know. But there will be some who will be learning content for the first time. But you obviously want more revision and less studying. And that goes back to, what we always say about starting early. Revision begins right at the start of the course. And if you are using, like Saif saying, the correct tools, the right textbooks, and exactly what you're supposed to know when you're supposed to know it, then you would have less studying to do towards the end. So there is a distinct difference, but naturally we find ourselves in a place where they do blend into one, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. So when students are revising, if there is a bit of studying, and the studying methods are actually correct for revision as well. So as much as there is a technical difference, I don't think it's much of an issue when it comes to exam prep.
Okay, thank you. That's very good definitions there for both of them, actually, because eventually they do overlap. So, while there's a distinction between them, they are there's a point where your studying can actually effectively be revision. So, Saif, why is it important for students to understand, to plan for both, studying and revision?
Oftentimes, what I've noticed is that students rely, or they think that without studying a subject, I can just revise for it before an exam. So like Amara said earlier, with understanding the content, that needs to be done a lot before your exam season begins. For example, if you're doing maths and you're trying to learn grade 7 topics, you can't just go onto a Maths Genie website and, one of the worksheets and start revising it. You have to understand the content. And what that means is you have to get someone who either knows that subject, go online, or learn that subject. The first 5-10 minutes of that learning phase is very important, because revision is, like you mentioned, revisiting it and mastering it over time. So in order for you to plan for both, you need to be able to understand the content at least before exam season begins. Or let's just say if you're in the middle of exam season right now, we've got 1 week next week of half term. If there are topics that you feel like you haven't covered, or you just don't understand, rather than revising them and making notes on them or testing yourself on stuff you haven't learned, you need to go on to the very basics. Go on the first video, find the 5-minute video, find a teacher, find a mentor, tell them to help you understand the very basics, the foundation of that topic, and then test yourself on how well you understand it, which would be the revision aspect.
Yeah, I guess doing it that way would sort of take away the panics of I don't understand this, and the mind's going blank as well. Visual aids. So, we've got mind maps, flashcards, and, just earlier in the show, we were talking about annotations and highlighting, which was my favorite thing when it came to revising. Are these genuinely helpful, or are they just trendy, Amara?
They're absolutely helpful. So these activities, the reason why they're helpful is because the revision aspect that I spoke about, where you're summarizing knowledge that you already have in a way that's easy for you to remember, these are the tools that you would use to do that. I mean, I'm a great fan of both. Some pupils like flashcards, some like mind maps. I personally and professionally, actually, when I am directing students to do this, and my colleagues as well, we do usually like to suggest which one would be used better for specific content. So, for example, when I've taught my separate science classes in the past, I have told them they have to make mind maps. A lot of them say they like the flashcards, but I know because of the overlap of the content and just, being a subject specialist, that task in itself of getting the information, and again, before I carry on with that, just the specification is where the information should be coming from. And I think that's where a lot of young people and sometimes parents rely too much on the resources that have been bought or created, because it should be from the specification. And it's not the be all and end all, but that is the starting point. So one of the things I always ask my students to do from the start of year 11 is to make flashcards and mind maps, and I decide which topic. So there's it's to how you use them as well. So with mind maps, once all the content has been mapped out and organized, which is what it's there for, it's then about trying to do it from memory again, recognizing any areas that are not memorized, and then filling those gaps in a different color, and over time accumulating that knowledge. With the flashcards, the best technique for it is to test yourself with other people. So, as parents, the best thing we can do is just hold up the flashcard and just give that feedback, and with friends. So again, it's not just about creating them, they can be used as well further. And the good thing about these is, before you go into an exam, I know we can talk about cramming a little bit later, but that's your tool to be using for that last minute cramming, if you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, a lot of this visual aids and mind map flashcards, it's subject orientated, because my daughter's studying French, and for her, flashcards has been a game changer. She's just loving. I mean, it's trying to improve my French a little bit as well. I'm still struggling, and she's hopeful that I'll get there one day. But the flashcards have been really helpful for her. And actually, yes, I agree. I do think that they work for particular subjects. I guess this is something for both of you, for your years of experience and exposure to students. What's the most common mistakes that students make when it comes to revising?
I'll go first. There are a couple. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. Number one, I would say the over-reliance on past papers, i.e. Just relying on past papers in the last 2 months or before the stretch of exams. Although that is really good, and that is what you should be doing, and it is advised by teachers and people like myself. If you solely just rely on past papers, then you're narrowing the content that you're tested on, right? And it can also give you false confidence, because just because some of the question has come up as a 3-marker, let's just say the year before or the previous year, that doesn't mean that same question will be molded into a 3-marker. It could come up as a 6-marker. So if you've tested yourself now and got 3 full marks, how would you ensure that you've got full 6 marks if that comes up? The solution to that would be doing topic-based questions. So there are lots of websites that you can go on, Physics and Maths Tutor, Save My Exams, Maths Genie for Maths, where you can find topic-centered questions. So I would say, along with past papers, you need to do topic-centered questions as well. So you are mastering each topic along with past papers. A second mistake I see students make, I mentioned this previously, is ignoring textbooks. So in this last phase, I would advise you flick through the textbooks, you go over the lesson notes as well. That doesn't mean you sit there highlighting or passive reading. It could just mean giving that textbook to a friend next to you and asking them to test you. It could just mean that you're reading over the textbook and you're making questions up from the content that you've previously learned. And the last thing, I just said this in the second point as well, would be passive learning. So just reading over your notes, not testing yourself, not doing active recall, not doing spaced repetition, not blurting down the information that you would have learned from the content that you've done over the years. So anything that's passive, and anything that ignores, all the content that you're going to be tested on, I would say these are the 3 mistakes.
Thank you.
I agree with all 3 of those points. And, I'm just going to add on to them, actually, because Saif's absolutely right. The over-reliance on past papers is a big issue, but there's 2 issues with that. One is sometimes there's content that actually, based on the limited past papers that you've got access to, there may not be a question on. So, for example, I had a student who asked me a question, which was very smart, and I thought it was a bizarre question, where he said, would a solvent except water come up in any of these questions? And I said, I don't think it will, but if it does, it could be ethanol. And, it was just a very bizarre question from my perspective. That's what came up in the separate science chemistry paper this year. It was ethanol instead of water. And it's a really important point, that because there's not been a question like that before. So if you were overly reliant on past papers and you weren't engaging with the content, and that's where I'm going to link back to the textbook in a moment, then you wouldn't be able to access a question like that. And that's why the past papers alone are not enough, not just for the grading aspect. I think it's also for the content aspect. And that's where I mentioned the specification and said it's not the be all and end all. The specification has to be engaged with because it tells you exactly what you need to know. But most importantly, it tells you what you don't need to know. And I think when students are using revision websites, and the ones that Saif mentioned with, those are my top 3 favorites, along with BBC Bitesize. I think BBC Bitesize is underrated. But those 3 websites are, they are top just notch. They're brilliant, aren't they? Just the best thing that could have ever happened. But I think the key thing is when you're looking at specifications, sometimes it's a bit vague, but that's where BBC Bitesize are quite precise with their content, and using that to supplement that is really good. But the textbook is a tool that's used to teach. That's a studying tool. And that's where Saif's absolutely right. If you pick up a textbook and you're going to revise from it, because they have the build up to the content and the deep explanation, it can be too much. So I think it's about using it for the depth. And that's what Saif's mentioning, like just find some questions. And that's where, if you go through a textbook, you will come up with scenarios in your own head of what they could ask. And then you can understand the content from the different angles for that ethanol question that I've just given the example of. And I think passive reading, I agree with Saif, it's such a dangerous revision tool. And it doesn't work. And just reading, I mean, watching videos is probably better than just reading. And there are some really good videos out there. But again, they need to be accurate. So, I had a student ask me about what does this word mean. I said, you don't need to know that because it's not the specification. But in the videos where you've got subject specialists, they will venture into further content that students don't need to know. And then that can confuse them last minute. So again, the accessibility, there's so much out there, just so much. And some of it's
overwhelming because there's so much out there as well. And you just don't know where to, from a parent's perspective for myself, because there is so much there. You think, I don't actually know which one to pick that's going to actually work for my child.
But some of it's dated as well, so it's not even relevant to the current 921s. And that's where the stuff that Saif has mentioned in terms of resources, and then again, making sure it's the right specification. That's the safest place to be for revision. And believe it or not, TikTok is not bad. It's not.
You just don't know how long you're going to last on the revision video. You might just end up scrolling.
That's for another show, TikTok. But the other thing about exam papers is, we had pandemic. So the last couple of years, the questions, how things have been set has been very different. The grade boundaries. And one thing that I keep telling my children not to get fixated on, which they keep getting fixated on, is the grade boundaries. They're like, oh, maybe they're going to be a bit lenient on here. Maybe. And I said, it's irrelevant. Don't think about it.
Absolutely.
But it's very difficult because they will look at the past papers and then they will look at the grade boundaries and then they will start thinking, I've worked it out. I know how it's going to be for the next. And I said, no, it's unknown times. You just don't know when they're going to start saying, right, okay, this is a year now that's had a full school time. There's not going to be any gaps in anything, so they're going to test you, and the boundaries could be different. It's measured against then nationally, so it's not on how schooling and education is going in general. So yeah, I think my myth to bust there is don't get fixated on the grade boundaries, because it's very difficult.
And I would add to that, actually, I'm sure as a teacher you've realized this, there's a big over reliance on predicted papers.
That was the next point I was going to make.
Because someone will come in as even like, let's just say, for example, myself, I create a predicted paper. You always have to notify the students firstly that predicted paper is not going to be accurate. And if we have provided that, that's probably based on the previous year's questions that came up, and we've done our predictions, right? But oftentimes what you'll notice is students find a lot of predicted questions online, and they will use that as the sole mechanism for their revision, completely relying on that, and then blaming once the exam is done, they'll blame the online person that it's because of them. But
and I feel for the students with that a little bit, because there's a lot of adults who will say, oh, I predicted this question and I predicted the paper. I mean, is it astrology? I mean, what is it? How are you predicting them? Are you can't dream it up.
Exactly. So advice for the students would be to not fall into that, if that is what you're hearing.
Predicted papers are just supplementary resources. But I think, I've had students go in saying, I heard that the English paper is going to be on this theme, and then just revise that alone, and then it's not come up. I mean, last year, everybody thought kingship was going to come up in Macbeth, and then it was on Lady Macbeth, and there was a lot of disappointed students. And
even this year.
There was the same thing happened this year, where the predicted theme that was trending was supernatural, and something else came up. So I think that's a big trap for young people, and I think for parents, which is why, I mean, I don't even entertain that discussion about, Miss, what do you think is going to come up? I said, anything can come up, just be prepared for it all. Because we're gambling, aren't we? It's a gamble, isn't it? And it's not fair on the young people, because the one thing I always say for year 11 and year 13 students is it's their last chance to get it right. So you don't leave any stone unturned at this point.
Absolutely.
And it's a consolidation of their learning, so it's not like you've got to just learn a specific area. You need to know everything. If you know everything, then you could be tested on anything and you'll be okay, inshallah. Now, I guess this is what people are really keen to hear. Exam techniques and preparations. There's quite a few methods out there, so if you could throw a few at us. We are coming towards the end of the first half, so Saif, if you have any that you could share with us.
I'll be very specific. So first things, a lot of students are going over stuff that they don't need to know. So firstly, identifying what board are you is very important, and you'll be surprised how many students don't know what board they are, especially for the sciences. So identify what board you are. There's a website called Brainscape, so I'm going to be very specific. Brainscape is basically an online flashcard tool where you can create your own flashcards, and you can find 9-to-1 GCSE flashcards as well, very specific to your content that you need to know. Right after you've practiced on Brainscape, I would advise that you go on Save My Exams or Physics and Maths Tutor. You find your revision notes on there, or if you've got the textbooks printed by the exam board, go on there, attempt the questions that are right at the bottom, and as a last revision exercise, once you're done with the past papers and the topic questions, get an A4 piece of paper and get that piece of content that you've done and just blurt down all the information within the next 2 to 3 minutes and see how much you can recall, see how much content you actually remember. Don't complicate your revision. If you just follow these simple steps, when you translate that information onto the A4 sheet, you'll figure out what is the content that I've actually missed out, what is it that I don't know, what is it that I don't understand. You can revisit that in your own from the exam specification or from your own revision notes, and you can find the gaps. What would you forget in the exam? Where are the missing marks? The last thing I would say is when you're learning key definitions, also see or verify those key definitions from the mark scheme. So in other words, revise the mark scheme. Look at what the answers are saying on the mark scheme, because as it's a bit sad to say, you'll learn an entire textbook, understand it, but if you don't mention one word, for example, the word digest or something in enzymes,
or only
yes, so like carbon and hydrogen only, we've got hydrocarbon, you may not get a mark. So I would say in this last phase, revise the mark scheme as well, spend a lot of time on there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice there, actually, especially with words, because yes, it is key, and you could be losing out on crucial marks. You'd think it's a 1 marker and me saying this, but actually, if you haven't said the right words, you've not even got that mark. So, yeah. And Amara, have you got anything that you could?
I mean, I agree with everything that Saif has said. That's a really good methodology in terms of exam preparation techniques. But again, like we said before, there's so many different exams, and the one thing I will say is your teacher is your biggest resource. And I say this in my assemblies, and my staff all agree with it in every school I've worked in. And, I say it as a head of school, your teacher stood around in this room right now will help you. So going to them and asking the questions, a student is ready for an exam when they're asking you those questions. And that they understand the content when they're asking questions with scenarios. What could they ask me this? Could they ask that? That's when they've built enough schemas to start asking those. So it's about, do a past paper, but give it to your teacher. Let them give you that feedback. And also writing essays, writing notes. So when I talked about how I get my separate science classes to always make a mind map, I check their mind maps. And then I say, you've missed this, you've missed this, you've missed this. The teacher is such an important resource because the teachers know it. So it's really important.
Sorry, guys, I'm going to have to cut you short. We are going on a short break. So listeners, stay tuned in for more, inshallah. And we'll join you after a short commercial break. Assalamu alaikum.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM.
The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "The last hour shall not come till the sun rises from the place of its setting, and on the day when it rises from the place of its setting, even if all the people together affirm their faith, it would not be of any avail to one who did not previously believe and derived no good out of his belief." Sahih Muslim.
Have you heard? Have you heard the exciting news?
What exciting news is that?
To celebrate their 60th anniversary, Ambala Sweets are launching their Dubai chocolate barfi from Saturday 24th of May.
So we can visit the Ambala Sweets store at 211 Dunstable Road in Luton and now buy Dubai chocolate barfi.
Yes, it'll be available from Saturday 24th of May and so much more.
That's fantastic. Don't miss out. Dubai chocolate barfi and many more tasty sweet treats at Ambala, Dunstable Road in Luton and all Ambala stores.
The perfect venue for your perfect day has to be the Barn Tea Green at Stony Lane, where natural beauty blends with rustic charm. With the stunning barn conversion, breathtaking garden room, private bridal suite and landscape gardens set within the picturesque Hertfordshire countryside. This unique and charming venue is ideal for intimate nikahs, mendis, weddings, other celebrations or business events for up to 200 guests with ample parking. For details, call 01582 800 222. Visit thebarnteagreen.co.uk or check out our Instagram at thebarnteagreen.
Had an accident, a bump, trip or fall? Then you need Claims Specialists, your first choice for accident claims. The Specialist Claims Company on Dunstable Road in Luton. With excellent access to expert solicitors and on a no-win, no-fee basis, Claims Specialists use their 30 years experience to help get you the best compensation possible. For injuries at work, taxi, PCO and private hire incidents, road accidents and vehicle damage, medical negligence, plus rented housing disrepair. In short, when you need to make any claim, click on claimspecialists.co.uk or call 01582 733 222.
For specialist immigration services, the people to talk to settle a family member in the UK, M&K Solicitors. For all your legal solutions for family, personal injury, clinical negligence, civil and property law, M&K Solicitors. Internationally recognised M&K Solicitors for local legal services you can rely on. Call 01582 732 503 or click on mnksolicitors.com. Your first consultation is free.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम किरण है। कोट कश्मीर ऑर्फन्स रिलीफ ट्रस्ट मेरा एक खूबसूरत घर है जहां मेरे साथ सैकड़ों यतीम और बेसहारा बच्चों की तालीम और तरबियत और पुरसुकून माहौल में परवरिश हो रही है और ये सब कुछ आपके तावन से मुमकिन है। अल्लाह से दुआ है कि अल्लाह करीम आपको सदा सलामत रखे और उम्मीद है कि आप इसी तरह अपना प्यार, मोहब्बत और तावन जारी रखेंगे। कोट UK office 0300123774 court.org.uk
The Arise to Success show is based on a prophetic model where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ nurtured the personalities of the Sahabas or the companions and nurtured their talents that Allah has created them with in order for them to succeed and for them to be our role models as well. Similarly, in the Arise to Success show, I aim to highlight inspiring individuals and their journeys to success to be our role models too, as well as to inspire the Muslim community.
Every Monday from 6 p.m.
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 10:30.
Good morning and Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Mother's Planet. It's Friday, 23rd of May, and the time has now just gone 10:30. I'm your host, Neelum, and joining me on the show this morning, is my guest, Amara. We did have Brother Saif earlier on in the show with us, who shared some fantastic top tips of things to avoid when it comes to exam revision and techniques, and some things that children can get fixated on. So, I hope all of that was of benefit. I have no doubt everyone took some great notes on that. And again, he's not here, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Saif for taking out the time to join me on the show earlier this morning. Now, Amara, we have talked about exam preparation, ways of doing things and things to avoid. There's what's the best way of balancing it all so you can actively recall, space repetition, and other study methods? Now, there's one particular that I'm thinking of. Can you tell us a little bit about it, please?
What, the Pomodoro technique?
Oh, let me get your mic on. Sorry, there we go. Yes, the Pomodoro technique. Yes.
So with revision, obviously, the best thing to do is to plan the whole exam season in one go from the start. So it's very important to have the entire exam season few weeks before that, and then what revision you're going to do when. The hardest thing for students is to plan on the day, what should I revise? That decision making can be very tiring, and it can be quite confusing. So I think, as parents especially, and as teachers, one of the things that we should help with is that revision plan. And every time I make a template for a revision timetable, it is the Pomodoro technique that is in the back of my mind, because it absolutely works. So it's all about having your 20 to 25 minute stints of revision and then a 5-minute break and then carrying on. And it's inspired by a tomato timer. And it just works. It's the right way to do it. Students can get very tired and they can overly revise. After a while, your brain stops being productive. And I think that would lead to burnout eventually if there's long periods of revision, but also that constant decision making of, should I do French next or should I do history? And if you take those decisions away and it's all planned, that makes it a lot easier, a bit more practical. And I think the breaks, that 5-minute break in between, and what happens in that. So is it a food break? Is it a movement break? Is it a use of a computer break? Because I know a lot of parents think that just take the devices away, but there needs to be some downtime within the revision to balance all of the learning.
Absolutely. And you touched on something there, burnout, which I think, for some it might be early, but actually, with some of the exams ticking off, I think French is done now. My son was ticking off the subjects that he's completed. So we've English literature, French, and RE. These are all subjects that have been ticked off. He's not going to have to look at again. So, but he's already slowly beginning to look burnt out. So, how, as a parent, I'm going to ask you to take your teacher hat off and put your parent hat on here. How can we identify the signs of a burnt out child?
I mean, physical exhaustion is something that we have to be very wary of. And I think sometimes in the exam timetable, some students can have 3 exams on a day, which happens. And that can be really tough for students because it means a lot to them and they put a lot into it. So even like as a parent, if your child does look very tired, that's definitely a sign of potential burnout. And just don't let them over revise. They don't need to be up all night. That sleep is really important. The physical activity is really important. But as a parent, the best thing you can do for your child is just feed them well. It really works. My students laugh at me because I swear by the Oreo biscuit. I think it's the ratio to sugar and cocoa. It just works in terms of, or I've just created a placebo effect. I don't know which one it is, but it's just giving them that before the exam. So you've got the chocolate and you've got the bit of sugar, hydration, but it's the food, you know, give them the food they like, cook for them the food that they prefer, and that will boost, they'll feel loved, and then that will take a bit of burden away from them. Just don't let them over revise. And I think the power of words can sometimes be underrated. So as parents, we put a lot of pressure on our children to do well, but I think in between that, the pat on the back and telling them that they can do it and they're going to do well and you're ready and you've prepared, because sometimes we know it in our heads but we don't say it out loud. And I think, you know, as teachers will say, but it means a lot from parents, because ultimately that's who they're trying to they're doing everything for, and they're trying to get validation from.
Absolutely. And I think that's so true. I think I'm the guilty parent of the one that said it in my head but not out aloud. So I need to try and enforce that a little bit. I guess the concern that parents have about, you know, when it comes to avoiding burnout and stop this from creeping up during the revision period is what to do in the breaks. So, you know, we know essentially they should take breaks, but the panic kicks in of, you know, what do they do during these breaks? You know, how can we what can they have? What, you know, even for students, they could be subtly doing revision and not knowing that they're doing revision in these breaks. So, you know, what advice could you give there? And also it differs for girls and boys. You know, I've got one of each that are going through exams, and I can see the difference in both of them. So, you know, and that is the case. You know, girls and boys differ when it comes to taking breaks. Boys will be very boisterous and girls will want to do something a bit more calming. So, you know, what's your suggestions in this?
I mean, generally the mindset can be different as well, can't it, for them? I think the key thing is it's about switching the brain off from that task and tricking the brain into doing something else. So generally, if your body temperature changes, which is where the physical activity comes into it, then your brain switches off that trail of thought, which means that the pressure or the stress of that will just be switched off for a while. So generally changing the temperature of your child's body really can help. That's where the physical exercise comes in, but that can also be in terms of just stepping outside for some fresh air. Just something as simple as that can actually change the brain chemistry, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to trick the mind, and that's where, again, the food would help with that. Having a shower can help with that. There's lots of little things like watching a video that's not related to work, having a phone call with a friend. It could be anything that the child generally likes to do, but it's all about switching the brain off from that current learning and tricking the mind into thinking, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. And then when the brain goes back to it, there's freshness and more productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in all of this, how important is, you know, mental clarity, you know, in the days before the exams?
It's the most important thing. It's the absolute most important thing, because an exam is a performance. So when a child is sat in the exam, it's not just about what's in their brain, it's about what they do with it. So being able to read with clarity, think with clarity, and write with clarity. And I always say, you know, especially like when I talk about the English exams, I always say it's the performance on the day that counts. And obviously you need the knowledge to be able to perform, which is where the revision and even the last minute cramming can be really useful. But if the child is exhausted, then it's very difficult to be able to perform in that exam. And I remember when I was at school, I had chemistry and geography on the same day, and I was, you know, you can tell I love my science, but I loved my geography, but I was tired in the afternoon when I did my geography exam, and I know that I didn't perform as well as my knowledge was. So I think it's getting that balance between being able to perform in the exam and having the knowledge to be able to perform. And that's where the long-term planning is really helpful for that. And the moments before the exam, you know, I know at schools we do last minute cramming, but we're very lenient in those sessions generally. And it's about going in calm, and we have really good routines for entering the exam, because getting into the exam and making sure you definitely haven't got your phone and you've got your equipment, that's stressful enough. So it is just about, like you said, mental clarity is at the forefront of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we've talked about cramming, we've been touching on it throughout, and I guess, you know, when we look about the night before the exam, is it too late to put cram, you know, what's your advice on managing last minute revision here? You know, is it too dangerous for them to be cramming anything, or should we be classifying it as even cramming, you know, or is it just recapping? What's your take on this?
I mean, cramming is an unhealthy term, and I think that's why everybody, skirts around it. Cramming just means that you're trying to force information into your mind, and it's almost like you're holding it in your palms like water, and then you just drop it in the exam. And I think the reason why it's dangerous is because of the lack of mental clarity when you're forcing yourself to retain information. And I think at times cramming does mean lack of understanding, but it needs to not be confused with productive cramming. So like you said, the recap. So if you already know the content and you're very well aware of it, but there's certain aspects that you're not sure of, cramming in those last minute aspects, that's not an issue. I'll give you another science example. So we all know about photosynthesis, but learning the 5 ways that glucose is used, that's 5 lengthy processes you need to know. And there's an acronym I use, which is SCARF, and if you just learn that, you'll be able to do that. So last minute of cramming productive content, which is supplementary to knowledge that students already have, is productive. But trying to learn everything or a whole topic the night before, it's unhealthy. But again, I say this, year 11 and 13, it's their last chance, and they will do everything they can to do well in the exams. But mental clarity still comes before that.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess nerves, these kick in a lot, and we start having children having panic attacks the night before, the morning of the exam. How, what's your suggestion as a teacher? I'm sure you've seen many of students come through that door and actually probably even have little breakdowns of before the exam. What's your advice on this?
I think a lot of all the stuff I've already said, it just means a lot to them. The reason why they're getting anxious or they open the paper and they freeze is because sometimes they have unrealistic expectations of what they should be doing in that exam. And they need to be told by the adults. It's our job as the adults in their life to support them. And they need to be told by us, your best is good enough. You do know this. And when I've had students say, I'm going to freeze in the exam, and that's where I always say to them, go in and don't overthink it. Just write what you're thinking. And then when you come to the end of the exam, then go back and double check to see if what you've written is what you wanted it to look like. And I think, as teachers, when we're teaching students from a really young age as well, how to start is always the difficult bit. Once they start, they're usually okay. And it's also tips like, if you don't understand that one question, don't just stop there, go to the next one, and the idea that they can come back to at the end, I think telling them that before the exam can be quite useful. But also, again, it's about changing the brain chemistry. So if I have students who, when they're visibly upset going into an exam, I tell them to go for a walk, get some water, have an Oreo biscuit, and then they go in.
Because it's a lot of Oreo biscuits.
I do have a lot in my office, but I think it's just about changing the brain chemistry again to trick the mind into coming out of the anxiety. And those are just general stress tips, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And I guess now actually my daughter had this question the morning of the exam. Now for her, her first exam was in the afternoon, so she didn't know what time to get up. She didn't know what to do in the morning. She left 2 hours before the exam started to get into college, just so that she was prepared. And then I think half an hour before the exam, she had a little minute panic attack that, oh my God, I'm actually going to sit this exam. What's your advice here for the morning of the exam? How, what should they do, especially for those that have afternoon exams? How can they handle that?
Because the weight obviously just adds to the anticipation, doesn't it? I think what you've described sounds good, because get there early, make sure that you're familiar with where you're going to sit, where you're going to line up, where you're going to leave your things. And once you've acclimatized yourself to the situation, then it's just about reading through your notes, talking to people around you. And if it is something that's still really daunting, again, do not underestimate your teachers. Speak to a teacher is what I would recommend. And I think sometimes young students wait until it's brimming and it's boiled right to the eyeballs before they speak to an adult. So I think it's about that communication and talk about how you're feeling. And I think as parents, it's important for us to just talk to them and say, there's no harm saying how you're feeling today. And if they grunt, say, no, just tell me how you're actually feeling, and discuss it with them, and then reassure them. That reassurance, we don't do enough of it, and it means a lot to young people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, GCSEs in itself is quite daunting. I mean, when you think 10 subjects, 10 different subjects, and yes, granted, some of the subjects have overlaps in them, but they are very different subjects. There's no link between French and English. They're two different contents there, so it's quite daunting enough as it is. So I think just trying to reassure them that they've got this and they can do this. The actual exam, now a child is in the exam, and I've heard some really horrible stories where my children have come back and said that they've seen children open the exam paper, look at the exam, and then close it, and then just put their head down on the table and go to sleep. And they'll get prompted by the invigilators to just write something, but it's such an awful situation to be in. So what's your advice to students that perhaps feel a bit overwhelmed and they look at the exam paper that I can't do this? What would you say to somebody there?
The preparation or the avoidance of that starts much earlier than the actual exams, because with your own children, I'm not just talking as a professional here. I mean, as a professional, I talk to invigilators and I have a list of students who put their heads down in mock exams so that we can work with them and support them. But if your child does that, you find out in a mock exam first, because they will do it in a mock exam. They're less likely to do it in the actual GCSE than they are in the mock exam. So I would start there. But again, it's when they go in, you just have to tell them, just write, just start somewhere. You do know it. I did something really funny because we had year 9 students once do an exam and they were a bit anxious about it. So I said to them, while you're doing the exam, I will do the same exam as you, and I think I'm going to beat you. And I made a bit of a competition of it, and that helped boost the confidence because they were quite young. And I think just things like that, just like competitions.
If I sat a year 9 exam, I'm not quite sure how.
I mean, it was a sports studies exam, and I got 42 out of 60. So, but I was helping my son, so that was a bit of a cheat on my part. And I think as parents talking about what happens next, I think it's very important for students to realise that exam, once it's done, there's something else after that. So sometimes students look at all the exams, and I always say to them, look at what's in front of you, not what's coming next. So it's about going from one to the next. And at the end of the exam, when students come out, they need time to decompress, to talk about what's happened. And I saw a lovely moment where a student came out the exam and said, oh, it was okay. And the teacher said, if it's not, you can tell me it wasn't. And he went, oh, actually, I really struggled with this. And the teacher said, well, what did you enjoy? And there was a really lovely moment that I witnessed at school this week. But I think it's once they've decompressed and spoken about it, the one thing I would say to them is, well, it's done. What's next? What's the next exam now? And then say, okay, so next I'm going to do this. But they have to have time to talk about how they feel. So if you feel like your child is struggling or is having that burnout or may have a tendency to just give up, just talk to them about how did that go and find some positivity. And I shouldn't admit this, but sometimes when students come out and say, Miss, was that the right answer? The exam's done. I just tell them, it was. Because I'm not going to tell them now so that they feel deflated for the next exam. So not always, but just sometimes I do just say, that was fine. I think you wrote the right thing. And then move on to the next one. So again, we just need to keep doing that as adults, don't we, for them?
Absolutely, yes. I know, because I think my son, for his English literature, I really like poetry. So I was like, oh, what was the poem? What was it this time round? So he was talking to me and he went on a different theme, and he said, I went on a different theme and my friends all did this. But he goes, I'm happy with what I did, because if I did the same, it's like I've not really thought about the poem. And I thought, that's what poetry is. It is an expression of what you interpret from it. And if he's justified it well, then that's good. Because at first I had a bit of a panic. I thought, he didn't do what everyone else did. He didn't have the same idea or concept. But actually, when I thought about it, he told me, and I went off and I thought about it, and I thought, let me look into this poem. I looked into it and I thought, actually, he just gave a perspective. And if he's justified it well enough, then that's something that will take him somewhere, because it's not a wrong or right answer, especially when it comes to English literature. It's, it's what you... Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, because sometimes students come out and they say, oh, I wrote this and everybody else has written something else, and they just get into a panic. But one thing you have to remember is when, I've done exam marking for years, and the first thing that we do is we do sample questions, and we give feedback to the principal examiner to say, when the exam board write a question, they're expecting some specific answers. A little bit like what Saif said earlier, like specific terminology. But sometimes students will say something that is absolutely correct, but it just wasn't thought of in the initial mark scheme. And that's how mark schemes evolve, and you get your allow section. So just because it's not the conventional response doesn't mean it's always the wrong one, because if what you've said is correct, then that's where the allow section comes in, doesn't it? So sometimes students do get bogged down with that a little bit. And again, that's where I don't like to go into details of, well, you probably got that wrong. that's where it's good to reassure them and say, well, they're probably going to add that to the allow. You could say something like that to reassure them. And then there's lots of YouTube videos as well where people are going through exams and saying, this is how I would have answered it, which are, you know, usually there by the end of the day, and students watch them. But one thing the students are, they're always very hard on themselves. So if they say to you, I watched the video, I think I only got about 16 marks, they probably got more. They just, they like to think worst case instead of best case. And when they come out, they'll tell you about 3 questions that they struggled with, but the other 17, they've done really well with. So because it's part of the decompressing, because we're very, you know, if we're conscientious as human beings anyway, but if you're doing something that's really high stakes, you will be overly conscientious and reflective. So when they, as parents, when they come and say, I really messed up, that's where we have to kind of help them unpick it. So was that a big question? Was that loads of questions? What about the rest of them? And that's where we have to give them that perspective, like you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess in the exam, you know, when it comes to reading questions and not understanding them, you know, what's your advice of what to do there? You know, planning your time accordingly so that you can go back to questions. You know, how would you, how could they manage this? So if they don't understand something, what's the best thing to do?
The best thing is to move on and come back to it. And I think teachers are very good at almost giving students a step-by-step approach to an exam. So like an English teacher will say, do this question, then highlight this, then draw that. I mean, like for science, when we talk about the physics, I always say underline the quantities and write the letters and then look in the formula sheet. So there's always that methodology the teacher's given them, and they need to trust that process. But there's nothing wrong with leaving that question and moving on and coming back to it. I mean, I had a student who said to me that there was a 6-mark physics calculation, and he said he did it and it looked funny, but he said I just carried on, and he said I came back to it and I realized I didn't square root the answer. And then I did that and it was funny, because I'm so glad I went back to it. I saved myself 3 marks. So I think them having the confidence to know, give yourself some time at the end to go back and then just check through your answers again. And one of the things I always say to them is just trust your instincts. And the other thing, sometimes students get too hooked on what the question is actually asking and try to unpick it. And what I say to them is the question will only be asking for things you've revised. They're not going to be asking for anything you haven't prepared for. And I think, you know, if I say, if you practice these answers and you've got these notes, that's what they're asking you for. So just match your practiced knowledge with what the question to you appears to be asking, and most likely you'll be right. So that's another way of just helping them not overthink the question.
I think that's a really good tip there, because I think it's very easy to think there's a key factor here they're asking and I can't see it, and leaving time to go back. My son is exactly that. He went back and he looked and he realized, I think it was in his geography exam, he said that he misread the question. And that's why when he told me that, I thought, oh God, misread, God knows how many misread questions he's done. And I tried not to panic as a mum. And I said, so that's fine. What did you do? And he said, I just went back and I read the question. I put a cross through it, said, do not mark, and got extra paper, put my candidate number, everything on it, and wrote the answer out properly on there. But I gave myself enough time. So I think that's where the over watching on the clock, we can get quite obsessed with the clock. So what's your tip on that? You know, not clock watching and saying, right, I need to allocate this much time, because in some exams you have to, especially with history and English, where there is a lot of writing, you have to allocate time. But what's your advice that you can quickly share on you know, the focus on the clock and not getting over obsessed with it?
I mean, you're absolutely right. There will be certain exams where half the last question is half the mark, so you spend more time on there, and the teachers will have told them what to do. And I think it is really important to plan your paper. But again, like you said, the obsession. If you've planned it, you won't get obsessed with it. But if you're falling behind, it's about having the confidence to, I just need to keep going. And I think that's where the over-reliance can be more dangerous than it can be good. I think generally with the mock exam practice that we do, and I'll keep referring back to that, but it's the trial runs, they're just so important. That's where teachers will normally realize if students are having the timing issue. And I've had loads of teachers come and say, in the mocks, this child just always used to leave the 12-mark question out. And now he's told me that he's actually answered it. So all that work I did in terms of timing and pacing works. So again, the mock exams are very good practice. And, you know, as parents, when you go to parents' evening, ask the teachers, you know, in the mock exam, is there an issue with timing? Is there an issue with not answering questions? Because that's the first thing I look at is in my classes is who's not answered questions, and I have that conversation with a child straight away, because there can be lots of different reasons for that. So again, it's start from the beginning, and so that when they get there, they don't make those issues when it really matters.
And just to touch on the mock exams, I have to admit, I was really cross when I used to hear that the schools are doing mock exams. I'm like, they've got exams in a few months. Why are you panicking them? But actually, my son came home on his first exam and he said, I'm so glad we have mock exams. And he said, I walked into that exam and I just felt like it was another mock exam.
That's what we want, and that's why we do it. So we spend a lot of time and energy and resources in schools to make the mock exams very, very similar to what the actual exam, or identical, because we don't want them to feel panicked on the day.
Absolutely.
If they hadn't had that practice and, you know, sitting at the desk with the right expectations, with the invigilator's eyes on them and their footsteps in the hall, and they didn't get used to that, the exam would be very daunting. And that's why we do it the way we do it. And, you know, the first exam is always the one where the students need a bit more encouragement. But, you know, I had loads of students who got really teary for the first exam and then came out and said, but it just felt like the mocks after. And that's what you want.
And I took it all away. I said, actually, it's a really good thing. It's really good that they do it, because actually he said, I didn't feel stressed or overwhelmed. He said, I knew I had to work, but I didn't feel overwhelmed. We've got about 50 seconds left of the show. If you could offer one piece of advice to the students tuned in this morning, or the parents, what would it be?
Believe in yourself. So believe in yourself, believe in your child, and just start early. It's really important to start early. The amount of disappointment I see because a penny can drop a bit late, just start early, but you can't force it. So just with the students, believe in yourself, and with parents, work with them, pace it.
Amara, thank you so much for joining me on the show this morning. Honestly, I could listen to you for hours.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
No, honestly, some really sound advice has been given, and I have no doubt that parents this morning have taken some really good notes from what Brother Saif has shared with us this morning, and what Amara has shared with us as well. So, you know, remember, smart preparation beats endless hours. So wishing everyone that's sitting their exams the best. May, inshallah, it will go well. Thank you again, and Juma Barak. Assalamu alaikum.
Coming up next, Bazminat with Brother